Hey, what's going on to the nation of YouTube and the other parts of the internet? This is your man Brian from the Brian Speaks On channel of the same heading. I am the creator and moderator of said channel, and I'm back to you with another topic. Yeah. Now, for those who may be seeing this for the first time, I have a particular kind of format of talking about topics on my channel. I do tend to talk about what we consider hot button topics of the moment, all around the world, depending on what's going on. I try not to stay away from much, but what I tend to do is I'll talk about the topic itself, but I try to approach the topic and give more of a perspective that comes from the side. It's not like the perspective that most people are talking about. And I'm not saying that to try to make myself sound unique. I just try to look at things from a more obscure angle, slightly different angle on things to give people a different way of thinking about it. So with that being said, my topic today that I want to talk about is not like the newest topic. It's a couple of weeks old, but things were kind of hectic for me. Not in a bad way, but life. And I wanted to talk about it anyway because I still think it's relevant right now. It does involve the Ukraine-Russian war, and I don't necessarily want to talk about those two sides fighting each other. I want to talk about a topic that was kind of hot primarily in the black community, but I saw people outside of that mentioning things as well. And it was when everything first started jumping off over there. Of course, Ukrainians evacuating, the area and crossing over primarily into Poland became like the news before the war actually started. And I saw, a lot of support for Ukraine people, but within my community, the black community, I saw primarily support, but then again, I saw a kickback, from black people. And most of them were talking about how they were upset about how African immigrants within Ukraine were being mistreated and not being allowed to cross the border as quickly as Ukrainians themselves. And, because of that, it blunted their support, if not, discontinued their support altogether. And I just felt like something was a bit amiss in all that. And I had several questions. So I guess this video is more like me playing devil's advocate, perhaps to some people. But like I said, I want to offer a different perspective on all this. And to those that generally follow me, I do tend to talk about race a lot. And some people, are a little hypersensitive to that and basically paint me as someone who makes everything about race. And, with that being said, it's going to be a little bit interesting to see the reaction to this one. So, although I don't want to diminish anyone's opinion about Ukraine and their methodology towards African people and black people in general, I don't have any experience, researching the Ukrainian code of how they operate towards black people. So I don't want to just dismiss people flat out in their assertion that Ukrainians were being racist towards African immigrants. But there are still some things that I think need to be expressed. Whether it changes people's thoughts on it is immaterial to me. But this is how I thought about it when I first saw everything. First thing I thought was, I don't really know. you know, And when I don't really know something, I tend to want to read a little bit more into the subject instead of being more knee jerk. I've learned that over the years. It's one of the few things of wisdom that I've learned over the years. But so as I thought about it a little bit more and did a little research on stuff, I came up with a lot of additional questions about the situation. Now, again, this is not to say that racism in Ukraine does not exist. I simply don't know. I've never been out there. So I can only go by the things that I saw in my, looking up of things. Um, and but even before I started researching, I had a couple of thoughts about racism towards Africans in Ukraine. Like, it sounds so easy, right? Because Ukraine is basically a Caucasian state. It's a very homogenous area of white people, and Eastern Europeans don't have the greatest track record as it applies to their opinions of black people and Africans and stuff like that, or brown people. So, seems like a slam dunk, right? But then I thought about it and I'm like, okay, if Ukraine is so racist, why would they have an immigration policy that welcomed African immigrants so easily into their country in the first place? If they were hostile towards African immigrants, why even have a policy that allows them freely to come? They don't have to have a welcoming immigration policy. And, so that was the first thing that I thought when I saw all that. It's like, well, why would they let y'all in anyway if they're so racist? What do African immigrants provide to the Ukrainian quality of life or GDP that would have some kind of borders open up for them that would somehow lift the state of Ukraine in some way? What do they gain from allowing African immigrants into their country? Like, what's the quid pro quo? So that was my first thought about all of that. Secondly, I thought about it also from the perspective of what if it was us here in America? What if there was an impending threat, an inevitable threat of invasion, and we Americans are trying to scurry the hell up out of here and get wherever we need to go if we're not participating in the fighting? You would think that a nation would hold its own citizens to a faster standard of evacuation than immigrants. Is it right ethically? I guess I guess it depends on, how you see it. But I would imagine that a nation would want to take care of its citizens and see them safely out of there faster than people who aren't citizens. Maybe the process is smoother. Maybe it's a thing where you're a citizen, you have ID that can clearly show that you are a resident. It makes it easier to cross over the border, especially now you're becoming a refugee now. Like you're seeking asylum, what have you. But you're a citizen. So I would imagine that it's a smoother process rather than for someone who is an immigrant now becoming a refugee to another country that, they're already an immigrant in one country. Now you're trying to cross over and become a refugee in another. Maybe the process is a little more convoluted in that aspect. And again, maybe the priority um, pyramid for Ukraine is let's get our people up out of here that we know are our citizens, and then we go from there. So there's that. So again, this is conjecture. I don't know the evacuation policy of Ukraine, but this is something that I thought of when I saw it. Also, for people who are immigrants, like there was a buildup to all this. Like Russia didn't just come in the darkness of night and in the silence of the dark and just roll up and ambush people. This was a premeditated invasion. There was forewarning. If you felt like you needed to get up out of there and you're already an immigrant, perhaps it would have been a little more proactive to go to whichever embassy represents your origin nation and seek asylum at said embassy. Get yourself positioned to be safely escorted up out of there. Because again, this was not something that just jumped off out of nowhere. Like people knew in advance. there was forewarning. Now, getting to the racism element, I didn't really hear anything about Ukrainian racism towards black people prior to this event. There was no, long-standing articles written by black people, whomever, journalists, reporters, about Ukrainians somehow having some kind of racist ideology against black people. So it made me wonder, what would entice Africans to go to Ukraine in the first place? Like, of all the places you can go to seek a better life, you go to Ukraine. Just doesn't sound logical. Sounds kind of obscure, you know? So if there's no real history, or if there's no real policy of immigration or history of aggression against black people within Ukraine, where did all this racism come from? So I don't follow the math ain't mathin' for me now. So, and again, it's easy to just jump to a conclusion. Caucasian white people in the middle of Eastern Europe, Russia, within the former Soviet Union. What's a black person to gain there? You know, I just didn't understand the knee jerk. Well, I did understand the knee jerk. Let me not say that. I did. I just didn't. I wasn't so quick to jerk my knee to all this stuff. Now, even let's say the Ukrainian people were hostile in their treatment of black people and African immigrants and stuff like that. My wife brought up a good point while we were discussing this, and she basically said, you know, if it's such a thing where you know you have a known element going on there that's anti-black and anti-African, first of all, why would you go there? And secondly, why would you expect people who you don't trust and feel have hostilities against you to be better when you're there? Now, if we're talking fairness and equality and and I forget the word, egalitarianism. It's a little tongue twister. Things like that. If you want to talk about ideologies like that, is that fair? No. But we don't live in a fair world. We don't live in a fair reality. Now, again, why would you expect better from people who have hostility towards you? And on top of that, why would you go to their land to try to settle if they're so hostile and don't like you and don't want you there? Why risk your safety, your peace of mind, your all that? And what would also logically thinking, if things are so terrible over there towards black people, how terrible are things over for where they just left to go there to seek a better life? Like what's going on in Botswana, in Nigeria, that's so crazy that you would go to Ukraine, a place that you deem to be very racist against black people to the point of potential harm. But that's still a better option than where you're leaving. You're traveling there to seek citizenship. So again, you got to look at this from an objective, logical aspect. And when you do, the math doesn't add up quite the same as just saying, "Oh, white people in Russia, they're Caucasian, they hate us. So of course they're gonna leave us over there to get shot up." That's what that's what the hype people would want you to think. But I don't get hyped so easily anymore. So that being said, even with that, I still felt like, you know what? Let me do a little more reading, educating myself, and stuff like that. And I found this link from NBC News, not some side channel, blog or what have you. And just so you can see, this is the specific article story that I found and read. I actually read the article. And it says in the heading, Black immigrants choose Ukraine for quality of life and education. War leaves them fearful. So when you just read the heading itself, they weren't afraid to go to Ukraine based on some fear of racism against them. They went there for a better quality of life and education. It was when things started becoming a war state where things became an issue for them and their safety. So, real quick, because they interviewed actual African people in Ukraine to get their perspectives. Like, this is not hearsay. This is not people just coming up with their own conclusion. It says, after having studied in India, Heidi Nguema visited Ukraine a few years ago, no plans to make it his home. But as an African from the country of Gabon, in the central part of the continent, he said he fell in love with Ukraine and decided to stay. Part of the reason for his affection for the European country that neighbors Russia is that he never had problems with racism in Ukraine. Even if I know some who did, it can't compare with the US, for sure. Said Nguema, who lives in Uman, a city in central Ukraine. So again, an actual quote from an actual African living in Ukraine and has been living there long enough to where if there was some kind of real racism going on, he probably would have felt it. Let me scroll down a little bit more because, there were others. Abraham Emmanuel Oluwafemi, a student from Nigeria, said he lives in fear of what could happen if he tried to flee, and as he stays sheltered at home. He chose Ukraine to advance his education, he said, but he never anticipated he would be caught up in a war. So again, these African folks don't seem to be being met with some type of hostile immigration policy to even enter Ukraine. They're entering Ukraine to better their life, self-admittedly, by these folks. They're bettering their quality of life there, and they're seeking better education. Why would Ukraine all of a sudden turn around and be hostile, racist towards them? Let me see if I believe there's someone else. Keep scrolling real quick. Ah, yes. Where's the... Let me get the person's name correctly. Just give me 1 second. I don't have my reading glasses on, so it's a little slow for me. Africans in Ukraine mostly migrate there for a high-quality education at what they call affordable rates. Many, like Dami Raji, are in medical school. She and others describe life in general as comfortable. Raji, a Nigerian student at Kiev Medical University, remembers the first night of the bombing. She heard the frightening explosions in the distance and was scared, she said. Being black in Ukraine has not been challenging, she said. But it has also not been without issues. In some other small cities in Ukraine, the blacks are united because there aren't many of them. They all know each other. Here in Kiev, there are lots of blacks from different countries, also from different parts of a particular country, so it's hard to be united. Of course, I have felt being black, but it's not so serious because I live in the capital where there are lots of black people. So again, they're not saying that they're not feeling the weight of racism on them. They're just feeling like, well, I don't necessarily have a tribe here. There are other black people here, but there are different kinds of black people. So it's less about racism and just more about finding a clique that you click with. So again, it's from NBC News, not MSNBC, you know, not the hype station per se. So again, just to try to wrap up, maybe sometimes we need to slow down and analyze things and not just go off of what somebody said and then everybody just jumps on that when it comes to certain stuff. You know, I just wanted to offer that slightly different angle of looking at this topic. Now, some people probably won't appreciate this slightly different angle because it doesn't fall in line with the narrative that they've created in their own mind. What can I do about that? I can't worry about it. I'm going to just say what I say. And that's what I'm saying. And I'm basing this not strictly on how I feel about something. It's just doing a little bit of reading and a little bit of finding out what's going on from actual folks from an actual area. So again, I can't speak to the border crossing situation and stuff like that. But at the same time, when you're hearing from actual Africans there, it doesn't seem like it's what it was being hyped as so much as it's a state of panic situation and you're already an immigrant, so it makes it that much more complicated. That that doesn't have to be racism, you know. When we speak of people of different cultures entering different countries, it's funny because the history, especially within Europe, has been Europeans they tend to be hostile towards other Europeans, and that crosses racial boundaries. Like when you're Irish or Scottish more so, they don't particularly rock with British people. You know, when you hear of Russians, migrating to Germany and trying to, become citizens and stuff like that, they're not welcomed, with open arms. They're not treated well. So it, you know, it's not as simple as some people are trying to create. And that's basically my assertion. Think about it, don't. The world still turns either way. So I'm just offering my opinion. I'm just a guy on the internet with an opinion. Other than that, that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to wrap and go about the rest of my afternoon. You enjoy yours, morning, afternoon, whichever part of the time zone you're in. And may we all stay blessed and hope that we are not invaded at any point to where we have to find out what happens at the border. Other than that, I wish us all well. Peace and love. Bless up.